The pandemic is front and center, but we don't want to inundate you with coronavirus-related news on every show. So today we're rebroadcasting a show about being a father in 2020. We'll be back on Thursday with a new episode, and on Friday, I'll host a special regional call-in show that looks at online education for elementary and high school students now that schools across New England have closed. Are you a parent or teacher? Do you have the tools you need to meet your child's or student's needs? Leave us a message at 860-275-7595, or you can email me, lucy@ctpublic.org. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Connecticut is the 7th state to pass paid family leave, which will allow workers to receive benefits starting in 2022. Now, it's not just for new mothers. Anyone who's employed, including fathers, will be eligible to take leave for the birth of a new child or to care for a sick relative. Coming up, we talk to a Boston College researcher about whether having paid family medical leave encourages men to take time off from work. First, what's it like to be a dad in 2020? Older attitudes surrounding the role of a father cast men to be the main breadwinners and disciplinarians. But times have changed. 3/4 of mothers in the U.S. are employed, and there are more men than ever before who are taking active roles in caregiving. So find us on Facebook and Twitter @Where We Live. Now, the idea for today's show came from a resident who attended the Where We Live coffee break at Silk City Coffee in Manchester, Connecticut. Coming up, we're going to talk to stay-at-home dads about their experiences, including the stereotypes they encounter. My first guest, though, in studio is Tony Judkins, Program Manager for the Connecticut Fatherhood Initiative with the Department of Social Services. Tony, welcome to our show.
Good morning. Thank you.
I understand, as I mentioned, you run this Connecticut Fatherhood Initiative. Before we learn about that program, I actually wanted to find out your experience as a dad. Tell us about it.
Well, I was a young father. I had a child when I was 17 years old. I was still in high school, and it was quite different from my second child, who came 15 years later. So the experiences were really different in that. As a teenager, I didn't know anything about being a dad, and one of the things I'm learning is no one really knows. It's when kids are born, there are no instructions on how to do it. We learn from our parents. We learn from what we see, and I had to do a lot of learning. It was tough because we didn't have programs like the Fatherhood Initiative when I was a kid, and those things are really helpful. They give guys some tools they need to really become all they can be in being a parent and a dad. I was lucky because I had parents who supported me, and that's one of the things that's really tough. A lot of kids don't have that support at home, so when they have these children at young ages, it's really tough on them. So really having support at home is helpful in the work, and also just being engaged. A lot of times when children are young, I know when I was going through the pregnancy with my girlfriend at the time, I would go to the medical appointments, and the doctor didn't even address me. I was there, and I was present, and I was engaged. But I think that's a really opportunistic time for the medical profession, medical doctors, to kind of help with that. If I'm engaged and I'm there, please include me in the conversation.
So when you talked you were a teen dad, and you said you didn't know anything about how to raise a child, and that's common for anyone, whether they're a teen or someone who's an adult, their first time a child. But where did you learn how to become a parent? Was it something that you saw within your family structure?
Yeah, I learned a lot of it from my mom. My dad wasn't around, but my mom was really, really engaged. And one of the things I learned from her is to be there for your children and show up. And she was a single mom for a long time, and she really instilled the ethic around being there for your children. And I thought that was really important for me. I learned from a lot of men in the neighborhood who had children. I learned from a lot of family men around that, and being engaged with your kids and being present. I mean, that's the first and foremost thing that you want to do, is be present for your children. And, just because you have a child doesn't make you a man. And that's one of the things that I think was really important to learn, too, is that I had a lot of growing up to do. At 17, you think you know everything in the world, but you don't.
Looking back, what are some of the mistakes you made as a young father, and how did you work to correct those mistakes?
Okay, so for me, I thought that what a father was someone who made sure that his kids had money and food on the table, made sure that I paid my child support, And for me, my child moved away from me right after college. And one of the things that I found out was, I thought I was being a great dad. I would send my child support every week, and anytime there was a birthday or Christmas or anything like that, extra gifts would go to my son. And it dawned on me one day. I called, and I wanted to speak to him. And I called, and his mom said, "Hey, AJ's outside." And I said, "Can you go get him?" And she brings him in, and I say to him, I say, "Hey, AJ, what's going on? How you doing?" And he tells me he's outside playing catch with his dad, and that really hurt me. I mean, that was a blow. That like no one would ever know how much that hurt, but he schooled me on something, because he equated the things that his stepfather was doing with him and being part of his everyday life, playing catch, helping him with his homework, tucking him in at night. Those things are what really matter to kids, and I wasn't there for that. And as soon as I hung up the phone, I was sure that his mom poisoned him against me, and then I thought about it, and one of the things that I knew that I was wrong because I didn't do enough, and when I started to think even more about it, I was like, I have to change the way this is going for me and going for my son, because I want him to know who I am. I want him to be connected to me. I didn't want the same thing that my dad did to me to happen to him. So I made an effort to really be there for him after that.
But how challenging was that? Because you were living in different states. Not everyone has the resources to get on a plane and visit their child several states away. And so when you're working with men in the Connecticut Fatherhood Initiative who are struggling with that too, struggling to make sure that they keep their job but also trying to be a parent, I mean, how do you navigate that?
So one of the things that's great now is that we have texting, right? You can text, you can FaceTime. Okay. Exactly. Those are things that I didn't have. So, but those things are really helpful. You can be a long distance parent in that way, and be there, be very present. For me, it was writing letters and making sure that when we did have breaks, I would go to see him or have him come see me. Those things are really important. But phone calls are really important. Checking in at least once a week to say, "Hey, how you doing? What's going on?" Those things are very important. Today, though, like I said, there's a myriad of ways for dads to be in contact. Even guys who are fathering from incarceration. I mean, you can still be in contact with your kids. You can write letters. They have programs where folks can write letters and they get them out to your children, or they have days where families come to visit. You can, so there's a way for you to stay in contact if you want, but you have to want to do that.
This is where we live. In studio with me is Tony Judkins, Program Manager for the Connecticut Fatherhood Initiative. That's with the State Department of Social Services. Coming up, we're going to learn more about how Tony works with men throughout the state who are trying to be better fathers, including when the relationship with the child's mother is no longer successful, and how co-parenting is important. But I wanted to bring into the conversation now Brad Harrington, Executive Director and Research Professor at the Boston College Center for Work and Family. Brad, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Lucy. I'm happy to be here.
So tell me, you're joining us via Zoom, so hopefully you can speak a little bit louder. But your center is looking at work and family. When we think about how dads are part of this equation, what do we know about dads today?
Well, some of the things that Tony said rang true even for the research that we've done. We work a lot with corporations and try to look at the experience of working fathers in fairly large organizations. And I remember the earliest study, we've done these studies on fatherhood for the last 10 years. And one of the first studies we did, we sent out this survey, and we gave the fathers 6 criteria for what it means to them to be a good dad. And of course, as you mentioned at the outset, Lucy, the first things people think of is, number one is they're a good breadwinner and they provide financially for the family. And number 2, wait till your father gets home because he's the disciplinarian. And those were 2 of the criteria, but we listed 6 and we asked them to rank order them. And those came out fourth and fifth in terms of fathers' perceptions of what it meant to be a good father. And the number one thing that really echoes Tony's experience is to be present and available to my children in their day-to-day lives. So right off the bat, in our earlier studies, we really came to the understanding that fathers really viewed their role quite seriously, in spite of the fact that I think a lot of times when people think about working families, men and fathers are often an afterthought. So it's been really great to be able to do this over the course of all these years and to learn, a little bit about the experiences that fathers have. Just a couple of quick things we've learned. One is that, this desire to balance breadwinning and caregiving is something that fathers take very seriously. And in all of our studies, 70 to 75% of fathers see their job as an equal balance between those two things. Second thing is they experience just as much work-family conflict as their moms do, as their spouse does. A lot of times, because women do far more in the home and more caregiving, the assumption is that women are going to be much more conflicted and stressed out about these kinds of things. But it turns out that fathers express at least as much concern about that as their spouses do. And a lot of that is because, A, they're away from home oftentimes more than their mom, and B, a lot of times corporations are a little less forgiving of fathers being, really engaged caregivers than their spouse.
I wanted to ask you more, Brad, about some of the stereotypes of fathers and their roles today. On Twitter, we got a tweet from Herbert who writes, "I'm primarily a stay-at-home dad, and folks have gotten better with that situation for sure," I guess accepting that this is something that happens more now than before. But there's still this idea that I am unemployed and thus have to babysit. It was a conscious decision and not a situation I fell into. What do you think about that?
Yeah, we did a study on at-home fathers a few years ago, and, it really opened our eyes. At the time we were doing the study, it was kind of in the post-recession period where so many men had lost their jobs. And what we were assuming is we were going to study men who had been laid off, who had lost their jobs, and really understand, why they made this transition into being a full-time caregiver. When we talked to the dads, they said, I think the at-home dads that we spoke to said, you're going to find our experiences very different than those guys. Those guys are filling in a sort of stopgap role within their family because they've been laid off. But the majority of at-home dads are not in that situation. They're people who've made a conscious decision to be at home with their kids. And usually that's based on the fact that they and their wife have decided that it's important for one of the parents to be home, if possible, when the children are young. And what we found is a lot of times it was a financial decision. In the study we did with the at-home dads, a lot of the fathers were social workers and teachers, and their wives were doctors and business executives. And so from a financial standpoint, it made more sense for the dad to be at home. And also because they were in these helping professions, a lot of times they had the kind of personality that lent itself to being a supportive and caring and nurturing parent. The two things we found consistently, though, throughout was that the two things that really were a struggle for at-home dads were, one is the stigma, and I imagine that's what you're talking about. And they said that came from, people that were very close to them, who sometimes said, well, I know you're doing this, but when are you going to get back into the workplace? Because the expectation is that's what real men do. And so oftentimes in terms of the internal struggle, they felt that was one thing, but they also had to deal with the expectations of others. And then the other thing that men experience when they do the at-home dad thing is isolation. They really struggle to find a social network. And that's why organizations like Tony's and there are groups in almost every major city in the country now, like NYC Dads is the largest group, and that's in New York City. They find ways, using technology and other medium to connect with other fathers because, for the most part, 9 times out of 10 or even more, if somebody stays at home, it's the mom. And so a lot of times fathers really struggle to say, who do I connect with and how do I make a sense of connection because I'm doing something that's a little out of the ordinary.
Well, Brad, I wanted to actually dig into a little bit more about why people have these perceptions of men who decide to stay at home, or the fact that dads don't know what they're doing. I wanted to actually play this commercial from Huggies.
To prove Huggies diapers and wipes can handle anything, we put them to the toughest test imaginable. Dads, alone with their babies, in one house, for 5 days. While we gave moms some well-deserved time off. How did Huggies products hold up to daddyhood? The world is about to find out.
Good luck, babe.
Again, that was a commercial from Huggies. My in-studio guest is Tony Judkins, who's also a father. Tony, you were shaking your head when I played that commercial. You see these and hear these stereotypes often?
Absolutely. One of the things I wanted to address, though, you said when you were talking to Brad, there were guys staying at home. They were babysitting their kids. You don't babysit your kids. You parent. You parent and you caregive. So that's one of the things that we try to tell guys, because they would say that too when they come to the program. I'm babysitting my. No, you're not. You're being a parent. So that's first and foremost. But the other thing is, commercials have done dads a real disservice along the line. For somehow in some way we forgot that men are really important to their children, and we look at commercials, or we listen to commercials like that, and we see them on TV, and it seems like dads are always not knowing what to do with their children when the world falls apart when mom leaves, and that is certainly not the case. I know a lot of capable men who are taking care of their kids. If not 50% more than 50% of the time. So, that's just a stereotype, and I think that we really need to close the book on that particular stereotype, because guys can do anything, and sometimes we need help. That's fine, but we can parent, we can take care of our kids on our own as well.
You're listening to Where We Live. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. In studio with me, Tony Judkins, Program Manager for the Connecticut Fatherhood Initiative. That's with the State Department of Social Services. And joining us via Zoom is Brad Harrington, Executive Director and Research Professor at the Boston College Center for Work and Family. Now, are you a stay-at-home dad? Several decades ago, stay-at-home dads were unheard of, but not anymore. Coming up, we're going to hear more about a Connecticut program to help men become better fathers. We also want to hear from you. You can join us. Find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Have you left your career to become a stay-at-home dad? Have you felt stigma from others because you're the primary caregiver? You can join us, or as always, find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. My guest today, Tony Judkins, Program Manager for the Connecticut Fatherhood Initiative, and via Zoom, Brad Harrington, Executive Director and Research Professor at the Boston College Center for Work and Family. Before we hear from one of the fathers that's been helped by the Connecticut Fatherhood Initiative, Brad Harrington, I wanted to go back to you. Before the break, we were talking about why there are perceptions of or stereotypes about dads who stay at home. We talked about how media plays a part, but I actually wanted to read another tweet we got from Ryan. He says, "Stay at home? No, but as a primary parent, I frequently have had issues with coworkers over me needing to pick up my daughter from school or bringing her to doctor's appointments, daily facing the you should be a slave to your work and be in your cube for X hours per day stigma." Can you talk a little bit more about that, Brad, about how workplace culture plays into men feeling they can't take time off, whether it's for a new child or to deal with, issues when kids can't go to school because they're sick?
Yeah, sure. I mean, one of the things you sometimes hear is that, sometimes frustrated women and moms will say, gee, if my husband does anything, like one day he takes off because my child is sick, or he comes to the school play, that people in the workplace kind of applaud that and say, oh, isn't that cute that, he's going to do something. He's going to stay home with his child. And I think there's that stereotype that when men do something, around being a good parent, that they're always applauded for it. But what research has told us is that that's only true when men do it very periodically. When men actually are what they call conspicuous caregivers, in other words, they take parental leave, or they have to leave every day at a certain time to pick up their child at childcare or whatever it might be, that men face probably more harassment, marginalization, backlash, if you will, than moms do. And I think the feeling is that, the workplace is adapting and changing, but it hasn't really kept up with the experiences of a lot of, dads in dual career situations or single dads or whatever it might be. And so I think there is still kind of a lag effect that's occurring where men who, are conspicuous and say, this is my responsibility, I share this with my wife, or in some cases, I'm the primary caregiver for my family. I think there is still an expectation that real men don't do that. And I think there's just, I guess the word lag is the right one to use. There's a lag between the experiences of most young fathers these days and what the expectations are that they have of themselves and what their spouse thinks that they should be doing as compared to how the workplace has accepted it. So I think that will come with time. But as of now, there is still that feeling that when dads are too upfront about all their caregiving responsibilities, they're not really fulfilling their primary role, which again, the stereotype is that's being a breadwinner. Yeah. And I think that's really changing pretty rapidly.
Let's hear from some callers. Charlie's calling from Hartford. Charlie, you're on Where We Live. Charlie, go ahead. Oh, I don't think Charlie can hear me. Let's listen. Marcus from Enfield. Marcus, you're on the show. Go ahead.
Hi, I just wanted to call and talk about like our situation with my wife and I. Is that we really can't afford childcare. So what we do is we have to work basically like a split shifts where she works or I work mornings, she takes care of the kids, and then I take care of the kids in the evening. And I noticed a lot of people doing the same things. But it's pretty much 50-50 where I'm taking care of the kids. And I can tell you, if I were a stay-at-home dad, it's definitely a much tougher job than going to work and earning a paycheck.
Marcus, can I ask you just briefly, you mentioned that you both are balancing work commitments with staying home when need be. How do your employers respond to that?
Well, now, right now, where I work is great. But I remember when my twins were first born, I had another job. And it was I took 4 weeks for my FMLA. And I basically got a lot of criticism from management, saying that I wasn't present for our peak season. Mm-hmm. So I think it definitely depends on the employer. But I still definitely see the stigma where, dads really aren't supposed to be there and they're supposed to be out, taking care of earning the living.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Marcus, for calling in. Find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. Tony, I wanted to go back to you because we've talked a bit about the Fatherhood Initiative, but tell me a little bit more about the men that are in your program and what are some of the questions, the concerns that they're trying to deal with?
Sure. So the profile of the men in our program, obviously they're low income. The average age of the men that we see is 32 years old. They have an average of 2 children. And some of their barriers include housing, lack of transportation, child support debt is a big issue for them, conflict resolution and anger management, and sometimes food insecurities is another one. So those are the things that they come to us with. And one of the things that happens when they come and they do the assessment, and we talk about, why are you here? And they say, well, I have child support debt. Mm-hmm. And then we begin to dig a little more. And it's like, well, do you have stable housing? Well, I sleep on my friend's couch. Well, what happens if your friend is, not going to be there? So the way we ask questions is really important in how we kind of figure out what's going on with these guys. So stable housing to him is being able to sleep somewhere at night, but not, stable housing to us is a little something that's different. So we really have to be cognizant of that stuff. So I think that one of the things too that the guys, they come to us with is this child support debt. And child support debt is paralyzing. And one of the things, though, that we've done to really try to help these guys with that is really get them into court for modification. I know back in the day when guys were incarcerated around this particular piece, the child support just kept mounting. We didn't do anything around the child support debt. But now in Connecticut, our child support agency has been one of the foremost partners at the table around the work. And now here, when guys are arrested, child support is stopped until they get out of jail. So that is a big deal here in Connecticut because, when you have child support debt and you have involvement in the criminal justice system, it is hard for you to do anything. So, kudos to our colleagues over at the Child Support and Judicial and Support Enforcement Services for working on that because that's something that really kind of helps these guys at least be able to breathe a little bit around this.
Earlier we were talking about men who stay at home, or men who are able or are thinking about taking paid leave. That's not even a consideration for the men you're working with.
Absolutely not. And but what we are finding out, though, is that these guys are taking care of their children, and they are spending time with them. Sometimes it's just not the way that the law would like for them to do it, but they are sometimes the caregiver, and they have these are resources that mom has at her disposal. So if mom is working, then dad will take that responsibility and make sure he takes care of the kids. So that's money saved from child care services, and they can actually, that's dad's contribution, since he's not able to make his child support payments, but he's giving to that child with his time and being there for that child.
One of the men that you worked with through the Connecticut Father Initiative is on the phone now, Perry Thompson, who lives in Waterbury, Connecticut. Perry, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
So tell me about your experience with the Fatherhood Initiative. We heard Tony just talking about when we need to, issues with modifying child support. Was this something that you were helped with?
Most definitely. Modification, as he put it, is definitely a great implementation into the program. It's always existed, but a lot of fathers didn't know that it was available. And now that they are actually exposing that to these young men, then it gives them a better opportunity to catch up on their arrears, as well as to feel a little bit more comfortable in fathering their children.
I'm curious if you could talk more about some of the other men when you were doing this program for 12 weeks. How did you help each other?
Well, we're sort of like in a round table type situation, and everybody has an opportunity to have some type of input. So someone may say something, and then someone else may come back with a rebuttal, or they may agree with them. But everyone becomes more like a close-knit family.
And then
there's no argumentation or anything like that in the situation.
Earlier, we heard Tony giving us some of his personal story about how he, like many parents, you have to learn how to be a mother or a father, and he saw his mother as a role model. Do you hear that from other young men in the program that may not have any idea how to be a dad, and that's how they're being helped?
Well, definitely, especially in today's time. It's a situation where the household is not more or less structured the way it was when I came up, an older gentleman. And I can see and feel some of the pain of the individuals that came up with just a dad or just a mom in the household. So, yes, it's definitely a situation that's a problem.
Well, I want to thank again Perry Thompson for calling in from Waterbury, one of the participants in the Connecticut Fatherhood Initiative. Perry, thanks for your time today. We appreciate it.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
I wanted to go back to you, Tony Judkins, before I bring Brad back into the conversation. Life happens, and not all relationships are stay on being strong. And so how do you talk with these men about how to be a co-parent, even if that relationship with their child's mother is no longer existing?
So the first thing, they come to us and they're angry. They're angry and they're frustrated around this stuff. So we give them a few minutes to vent, and then we go, okay, so what are you going to do to change that? And one of the things that we're really are focusing on is really helping these guys navigate the co-parenting, and really taking a look at what they can bring to the table around co-parenting and how to better do that. We work with them on conflict resolution, so helping them understand that the romantic relationship with you and mom is over. All right, so the thing that you should really be focusing on is your children. And so if you can keep your eyes on the prize, that's going to help you with navigating the issues that you may have with mom. And for moms too, we want moms to really engage and be present, but also understand that this guy, this man, this father is someone who is important to these children. And if he's not in their lives, it's not insurmountable, but it really makes it tougher for children to succeed when dad is not involved.
You're listening to Where We Live today as we look at what it means to be a father in 2020. My in-studio guest, Tony Judkins, Program Manager for the Connecticut Fatherhood Initiative with the State Department of Social Services. And then via Zoom, Brad Harrington's with us, Executive Director and Research Professor at the Boston College Center for Work and Family. Brad, I was curious what your response is to this Connecticut Fatherhood Initiative, this idea that men are learning how to become better parents, but also working together with other peers, learning from each other. Do we need more of these kinds of programs?
Oh, absolutely. I think wherever you are on the socioeconomic scale, I think one of the problems that fathers have is they just don't take the time or find the outlet to have conversations with other dads about how do we do this well. A lot of, the folks that Tony works with, I'm sure, a lot of folks that I've done research with, they don't get paid leave. They don't have an opportunity to necessarily spend time and immerse themselves on caregiving with their kids one-on-one and that kind of thing. And they're expected to be right back at work almost immediately. And I think that because of that, they just don't have the opportunity to really immerse themselves in what it means to be a good father. And so, and fathers aren't typically as likely to network with other dads, talk about these issues. I go into a lot of organizations and corporations to talk about, the issues of working fathers. And almost invariably, what I hear people say afterwards is they'll come up to me and say, that was great, because that's the first time anybody's ever had a conversation in the workplace about what it means to be a working father. So anything that we can do, whether it's Tony's organization, these at-home fathers groups that I mentioned earlier that exist all over the country, conversations within employers and corporations and stuff like that. Anything we can do to raise the profile of this issue and make people understand that it's a challenge for fathers, because it's not necessarily something that they saw when they were growing up, because a lot of times fathers at that time period were expected to focus, as much as possible their full-time energies in the workplace. So these conversations are really necessary.
Before we take another call, I wanted to go back to Tony, because talking big picture, this isn't just about helping men become better fathers, but outcomes for the family at large. Can you talk through some of those outcomes when fathers are involved both financially and emotionally?
Sure. So just to kind of give it some context, so in 2017, U.S. Census Bureau data says that 19.7 million children live apart from their father, and that's very alarming. But research shows when a child is raised in a father-absent home, he or she are affected in many ways. One of them is they may live in poverty. They're 4 times greater chance of them living in poverty when dad is not in the home. That's astounding. That's a big one. The other one is they're twice as likely to drop out of school. So we know that education is very important for all of us. And so when this dad is not involved with his children, your children are susceptible to dropping out of school and not getting an education. And the other big one is they're 7 times more likely to be a teen parent. And that is something that we all should be kind of really listening to, because that just starts a cycle again. If we're not doing anything to make sure that guys are connected to their children, these are the things that are going to happen.
Charlie's calling from Hartford. Charlie, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Go ahead.
Hi, this is Charlie. This is really enlightening hearing about this, because I'm a divorced dad. I was divorced since 2016. I had to go to the family court system, and just dealing with those stereotypes, I've dealt with them, day after day, through the family court system, the pediatrician, the school. And it's just hard for men to deal with this. I think shows like this raise awareness and makes it a little easier for dads to be there. Because I have a little unique experience. Growing up, it was my mother who left and not my father. So I grew up mostly with my father. So it was hard to really show people that the other side of the coin also exists, and that both parents should be treated equally, and they are both important in the life of the children. So I just want to thank you for a show like this.
Well, thank you.
So that there are dads there who are parents as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Charlie, for your call. Again, he was talking about how he would deal with stereotypes in many systems, whether it was the court system, school, and whatnot. But I wanted to thank Tony Judkins for joining us today here on Where We Live, Program Manager for the Connecticut Fatherhood Initiative with the State Department of Social Services. This is a program that's been in the state since 1999, and you have locations all over Connecticut.
That is correct.
Well, we appreciate your time today, Tony.
Thank you for having me.
This is Where We Live. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Coming up, Connecticut is actually the seventh state to pass paid family leave. So what factors keep men from taking time off, even when these programs exist? We're going to talk more with Brad Harrington, Executive Director and Research Professor at the Boston College Center for Work and Family. And you can join us, too. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Today we're talking about what it means to be a dad in 2020, now that 3/4 of women are working in the United States. My guest via Zoom today is Brad Harrington, Executive Director and Research Professor at the Boston College Center for Work and Family. Sally on Facebook writes, "My husband was stay-at-home solely due to our salaries. I made a little more, but we couldn't afford 2 in daycare, so he stayed home. I remember one day he came home from the park and said, 'None of the other moms will talk to me.' He felt very isolated, and it took a long time to break in with the mostly female home parents in our small town. You can join us, too. Find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. Brad, I wanted to talk about the idea again that Connecticut is now the 7th state to pass paid family leave. In Connecticut, workers won't be able to receive benefits starting until about 2022. But I wanted to find out more about what the research says when programs like paid leave exist for men, whether it's working for a-for-profit or a state program like Connecticut's. What are some of the factors that lead men to take leave or maybe not?
Sure. I'm a lot more familiar with the corporate programs than I am with how all the state programs work. But one of the things that we learned when we did a study about dads' attitudes on paternity leave, which was about 5 years ago, was that fathers very much wanted to take leave if it was available to them. They were afraid, as you can imagine, about being stigmatized or having people ask questions about, what are you going to do during your leave, and is it really necessary, kinds of things. But one of the main concerns they had was that they be fully paid for the time that they took leave. At first blush, you might say, well, women take leave and they take it unpaid. Why wouldn't dads do that? And I think that, obviously women, there's a real pressing reason why they take leave and their need to do so in terms of birth and recovery and some initial bonding. But I think a lot of times, especially if the mom has taken unpaid leave, then fathers are in a situation where they say, unless I'm paid at as close to full pay as possible, it's not going to be very likely I can do this. And we know, and the reason Connecticut's doing what they're doing is because the United States has very backwards policies about paid leave for parents or for family care in general. And so, given the circumstances we have, everybody's got to kind of fend for themselves financially. And so, for dads to take it, I think it's even more pressing for them in many circumstances to be paid as fully as possible. We did a study on paid leave, and we were fortunate to do it in 4 corporations, all of whom have expanded their paid leave policies. And the fathers who take leave receive somewhere between 6 and 16 weeks of paid leave. And we were surprised to see in our study that, and again, the circumstances were sort of ideal. These fathers were well educated, they were well paid, and they were being compensated 100% during this time off. But we found that 62% of the fathers took the full leave available to them. And even if they got as much as 16 weeks off, the average was they took about 80% of that 16 weeks, the dads who filled out the study that we did. And, what found was not surprising. The pay was important. The fact that their leadership supported them and their coworkers supported them. The fact that they had wives who had very busy and very responsible jobs, and in many cases earned as much or more than they did, made it, such that fathers said, hey, if the leave is available and if my workplace is going to support this, I am going to take it. And Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Curious when we talk about some of what men face in the workplace if they choose to take paid leave. Women for so long worry that if they take time off, they will be passed over for promotions, or it does impact their ability to be paid more, or in the future. And so, are you saying that within the study that you found, the men that were taking the paid leave, they didn't face those repercussions?
No, they did, but it was interesting that the women in the study were just as worried about that as the men were. In fact, when we asked the men, like, if you limited the amount of time you took off, what was the limiting factor? And the number one limiting factor was a fear that it would delay my career advancement. And 50% of the dads said that they had that fear, but 60% of the women had the same fear. So, what we found is when it came to the workplace, mothers and fathers had a lot of the same issues and experiences when it comes to leave. I think it's just still more uncommon for the men to take it. But one of the very positive messages we got was that 80% of the women and the men in the study, and again, this is in just a few particular corporations, 80% of the women and men said that they thought that their organization was equally supportive of men and women taking expanded leave. And so, again, like I said earlier, we're at a period of transition, and I think there are encouraging signs that where employers step up and offer leave, if they encourage men to take it, they will do it. And yes, they face some of the pitfalls that women face in terms of what their career trajectory might be afterwards, but their concerns are no different than women's when it comes to that. I think there are some women who said they felt that when they came back from leave, their career opportunities were more limited, and that suggests there still is some unconscious or conscious bias about, well, once women have children, they're gonna take a step back career-wise. But some men were concerned with that as well.
You mentioned, the U.S. Really falls behind most other nations when it comes to offering paid family leave. When we look at how other countries have rolled out paid leave, do you also find that men are less likely to take leave than women?
Yeah, I think it's still the case that that's true. People always point to the Nordic countries as the most advanced on these kinds of policies. And what the Nordic countries did fairly early on was to say, we'll designate a certain amount of leave that only the mother can take, a certain amount that only the father can take. And then there'll be a shared period, which the couple can decide and negotiate who's going to take the shared leave that's available. And once they did this kind of use it or lose it for men, the vast majority of men, like 90% of men, take that leave period that is designated for fathers. They don't want to lose it, and they want to have the time with the children. But when it comes to the shared leave period, there is still more of a tendency for women to take the majority of that leave. So, it's still not kind of a universally accepted or even accepted in specific places that there is total equality in the workplace. But certainly a lot of countries are ahead of us in terms of promoting the ideas that this is very much for dads too.
So it sounds like for our country to be more accepting of the fact that men should be able to take paid leave as well, we need to have more of them taking leave and to get employers to see that this is important.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, when we talked to the men in our study and we said, well, who was most helpful in terms of you thinking about this thing? It was coworkers. It was number one. They were the people that really gave me information and helped me understand what I'd be grappling with here. And then the other issue was, they looked at whether managers and senior leaders had taken leave. And, many of them in the open-ended comments said, boy, if senior managers take it or senior managers talk about it and really echo that they are supportive of this, that makes a huge difference in terms of our inclination to feel it's an okay thing to do.
I mentioned that Connecticut is just one of 7 states and Washington, D.C. that allows paid family leave. Again, it won't be implemented until 2022. But anything that you've seen in the way states have rolled this out that might make it more equitable for both men and women to take leave?
I haven't studied the policies in the states quite so much as we've looked more at the corporate activities. Again, the things I said a minute ago about the commitment and the communication from leaders and organizations to say this is really a good thing to do. I think some organizations also are really trying to take a positive stance in terms of saying, how do we really present role models, people that are well respected in the workplace. That people would look up to and say, geez, if they're taking it and they seem to be doing okay career-wise, that's an important thing to do. We also talked earlier about advertising and promotion and things like this. And, the media has not done any favors to men. You played the Huggies ad way back when. I think that, that was an ad that really got attacked by a lot of the fatherhood groups who said, why are you portraying men in this way? This is not the way fathers actually operate these days. And, one of the organizations we've worked with, and in fact, they were the sponsors of the parental leave study, is Dove Men Plus Care. And Dove has tried through their men's products to really promote an image of men are fathers too, and real men do caregiving and that kind of thing. So they've been also championing, as an organization, Unilever and the Dove Men Plus Care line have been championing parental leave for all dads. And so, we need organizations that, both in terms of the media portrayals, are going to show that dads are really interested and engaged and involved in these kinds of things, and also organizations who try to champion these kinds of policies as being the right thing to do for mothers and for fathers. And we're seeing an organization like that sponsored our study doing a lot of work lobbying on Capitol Hill and so forth to try to say, how do we make paternity leave something that employers consider very seriously, and hopefully champion paternity leave for all dads in the country and not just a select few.
As Connecticut tries to roll out this paid family and medical leave in a couple of years, again, are there incentives that the state could provide to get fathers to take it? Because as you mentioned earlier, fathers are less likely to do so, especially if they're the higher paid parent. And if they're not going to get fully paid, they worry about what that means in terms of finances.
Well, the biggest thing is finances, and I don't know the Connecticut policy, but I am guessing that they are not going to get paid at 100%. So that's going to make it more challenging for them to take it. I do think some kind of a promotional campaign or something that really, in the same way we raise people's consciousness about climate change, about smoking, or whatever it might be. I think the idea of this is a change process, and so the degree to which we can use positive messages and positive campaigns to encourage men to do this kind of thing would be great. Anytime you can get men talking to men, the kinds of things Tony talked about with his client base, but it can happen at all levels and all kinds of organizations. Get men talking to men about what their experience was like and how important taking leave is in terms of really shaping your relationship with your children. Tony mentioned, a lot of the very positive outcomes that you have from having engaged dads. And the more engaged fathers are at the beginning stages of children's life, research has shown that the more they're involved early on, the more likely it is that they'll be, hands-on dads, for the long term. So I think any messages we can get out that say, if you really want to have a strong relationship with your child, it starts really, really early. And if you can take leave, you'll find that it has positive knock-on effects for your child in terms of their health outcomes, in terms of their likelihood of reducing risk behavior, in terms of education, in terms of health, and all that kind of thing.
I wanted to read a tweet from Dory about changing roles. She writes, "My husband stays home with the kids while I work my job and work towards my PhD. He's such an amazing father, and I'm so glad my boys have this period in their lives to spend so much time together." Thank you, Dory, for sharing that. And before we let you go, Brad, I understand that you've also looked at millennial dads. What does the future look like in terms of how they perceive themselves as fathers and their roles?
Well, I think, millennial fathers, we expected when we studied millennial dads and compared them to the older dads, the Gen X and the baby boomers, that there would be tremendously drastic differences. That's not so much the case in terms of what we've learned in our research. But what we do know is millennial dads are far more likely to have a full-time working spouse than was the case amongst, say, the baby boomers. And because of that, the expectations for millennial dads are going to be much greater. What we find in our studies is, especially of young dads these days, is somewhere approaching 3/4 of them, have full-time working spouses, and about the same percentage say we want caregiving to be egalitarian. We want to be shared caregivers, and we want to do this on an equal basis with moms. Yeah. I think that they're not there yet, but I think that you're going to find as this generation comes up with so many dual career couples, you're going to find that dads are going to be probably a lot more demanding of the time that they need to be effective.
Well, we'll leave it there. Brad Harrington, Executive Director and Research Professor at Boston College Center for Work and Family. Thanks so much. Today's show produced by Carmen Baskoff. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Thanks for listening, and learn more about the show. Just download Where We Live from your favorite podcast app.